Hey guys, today I'll show you a crime thriller TV series named Hijack Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins inside the airport where a man, frantic and panicked, was carrying a bag of guns. He went through security where the security officer clearly noticed something was amiss. Yet she let him through, even turning away at this critical moment to answer a phone call. The man, realizing he had missed the boarding time, dashed to the gate, pleading with the flight attendant to let him board. At that moment, Sam, a VIP customer who had also not boarded, arrived at the gate with a calm demeanor. He kindly intervened, ultimately helping the other man board the plane. Now, with all 200 passengers seated, the flight attendant closed the cabin door and the plane took off, heading from Dubai to London Heathrow Airport. The journey was expected to take 7 hours, and everyone was looking forward to it, oblivious to the brewing crisis. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, the lavatories were available for use. A girl had just finished using the restroom when she noticed something odd under the sink. When she picked it up for a closer look, she realized it was a bullet. The discovery sent a chill running down her spine to her butt, but she managed to calmly return to her seat and quietly informed her companion of her find. The girls were all visibly shaken. At that time, an elderly man in a floral shirt, noticing the commotion, came over with concern to ask what was wrong. So the girl handed the bullet to the old man. He signaled her to keep quiet and assured her he would hand the important item to the flight attendant. However, when the old man with the bullet saw the flight attendant, he did not make any indication of the issue. Instead, he walked straight into first class, approached a bearded man named Stuart, and whispered that a girl had found their forgotten bullet and was now suspicious. To be safe, he suggested they might need to take action sooner than planned. Stuart, visibly upset with his sensitive beard, instructed the old man to go back and calm the passengers to avoid any complications with their plan. After speaking, he handed the old man a distinctive green hat as a signal that the operation should commence. Their associates would see the green hat and start the plan within 5 minutes. In the first-class cabin at that moment was Sam, a top-level negotiation expert for major corporations. He was flying to London hoping to win back his ex-wife. Watching the furtive behavior of the two men, Sam couldn't help but grow suspicious. After leaving Stuart, the old man donned the green hat and then made his way back to economy class. He took a deliberate stroll around the cabin before approaching the girls. The old man came up with a prepared excuse, claiming that he had spoken to the flight attendants and that the bullet might have accidentally been dropped during the security check before takeoff. But the girls were skeptical. It seemed unlikely that such a major airline would make such a basic mistake. They decided to verify the story with the flight attendants themselves by pressing the call button above their seats. However, when the attendant arrived, they seemed clueless about the girl's description. Clearly, the old man had not actually sought any confirmation. Meanwhile, Sam, who was harboring his own suspicions, was discreetly keeping an eye on Stuart's every move from his seat. When the man returned from the restroom, he was carrying a green toiletry bag. Sam couldn't stay seated any longer. He got up to check the situation in economy. To his surprise, several passengers had toiletry bags identical to Stuart's. Sam's suspicion deepened, and he couldn't resist asking a flight attendant why he hadn't received a toiletry bag. What he learned sent a chill running down his spine to his butt. Since the flight was not overnight, no toiletry bags were distributed to any passengers. A foreboding feeling crept over Sam, and just as he was about to head back to first class, the hijackers suddenly sprang into action. They pulled out weapons from their toiletry bags and commanded the attention of all passengers. In an instant, the cabin was filled with the terrified chicken screams of the travelers. Under the threat of the weapons, all passengers were forced to stay put, hands over their heads, sobbing like giant babies. One of the flight attendants, seizing a moment before the hijackers took control, ran into the crew area and phoned the cockpit. The flight captain, upon learning of the dire situation, contacted the Dubai command center, reporting a serious security incident on the flight. In the cabin, the armed hijackers quickly took control of the situation. They were well prepared and clearly had a plan. As one of the hijackers was collecting the passengers' communication devices, two men seated behind Sam were quietly plotting a counterattack. They stuffed golf balls into socks and pulled the long cord from a remote control, waiting for the right moment to act. Seeing this, Sam cautioned them against any rash moves, reminding them that the hijackers were armed and that any careless action could be fatal. However, the two men, their blood up and eager to be heroes, paid no heed to Sam's warning. On the other side of the plane, Stewart in first class had just taken a flight attendant hostage and was threatening the captain at the cockpit door to open it. His true identity was revealed as the ringleader of the kidnappers, but the flight attendant told him that his efforts were in vain. According to the airline's policy, no matter the circumstances, the cockpit door must remain locked. Stewart, unfazed, indicated that they had prepared for such a response. He leaned in close to the flight attendant and calmly revealed that before boarding, they had learned of an affair between her and the captain. Perhaps regulations wouldn't work, but a simple "I love you" from the flight attendant to the captain might be enough to change the situation. In the cockpit, the co-pilot, having received a call from Stewart, resolutely refused to open the door, swearing to protect it. Stewart demanded to speak to the captain, threatening the life of the flight attendant and leveraging their secret affair to force the captain to open the cockpit door. Reluctantly, and despite the co-pilot's strong objections, the captain opened the door, and the plane was completely taken over by the hijackers. Stewart pointed a gun at the captain's head and forced him to report back to the command center that everything was fine on the plane, insisting that the previously reported security incident was a misunderstanding caused by a few drunken passengers causing a disturbance. He claimed that he would hand these passengers over to the police upon landing. The command center did not suspect anything, and the staff breathed a sigh of relief. Inside the hijacked plane, the atmosphere was extremely tense. A hijacker approached Sam and demanded his phone. Thinking quickly, Sam lied that he had left his phone in first class. As soon as the hijacker left, Sam swiftly took out his phone and sent a text message to his ex-wife, signaling danger on the plane. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Stewart, wanting to prevent passengers from communicating with the outside world, ordered the captain to shut down the wireless network. Little did he know, a second before the network went down, Sam had managed to send a distress message to his ex-wife. The flight attendant, under threat from the hijackers, began broadcasting to announce that the plane was under control and that the command center was unaware of the situation. She hoped all passengers would stay in their seats and not resist, warning that punishment would follow any disobedience. Unexpectedly, as soon as she finished speaking, Sam suddenly stood up. He raised his hands, ignoring the warnings of the hijackers, and walked towards his seat. The tension reached a peak as Sam took out his phone from his seat and obediently handed it to Stewart. This action shocked the hijackers. Sam explained that with 200 passengers on the plane, it was impossible for everyone to follow the hijackers' orders. If they let him return home safely, he would act as an informant and help the hijackers maintain order. The hijackers were incredulous, never having heard of a passenger willing to assist them. Sam continued, explaining that he had noticed something was off during the earlier conversation between Stewart and the old man in the floral shirt. Their nervous expressions led him to deduce that they had not followed their original plan and that some unexpected event had forced them to hijack the plane earlier than intended. As an expert negotiator, Sam understood the hijackers' current state of mind and suggested that if one thing went wrong, it was likely that the rest of their plan would not go smoothly either. His words made the already anxious hijackers even more unsettled. Inside the cabin, although most passengers dared not make any sudden moves, two men who were itching to try something had seized the opportunity. Armed with makeshift weapons they had prepared, they coordinated an attack. One of them strangled a hijacker with a rope, while the other smashed the hijacker's arm until his pistol fell to the ground. The commotion attracted other accomplices, who together overpowered the two passengers attempting to revolt. Stewart, the ringleader, hurried over. When he discovered the missing firearm, he became flustered. After all, the possession of weapons was a key factor in controlling the situation. Sam looked down and, to his surprise, found the pistol at his feet. He picked it up and pointed it at Stewart. Unexpectedly, Sam did not fire the weapon. Instead, he handed it over to Stewart. This gesture earned him the hijacker's favor and trust. On the other side, the security officer who had just been at Dubai airport hastily requested sick leave right after hanging up the phone and rushed home. It turned out the hijackers had kidnapped her family member to ensure they could successfully get firearms onto the plane. That explains why the hijackers could easily pass the security check with guns. Meanwhile, Sam's ex-wife, the only outsider who received the distress message, immediately informed her police officer boyfriend, Daniel, of the situation on the plane, hoping that Daniel could intervene and quickly notify his superiors. Although Daniel was miffed that his girlfriend was still in contact with her ex, he acted responsibly, calling his ex-girlfriend Anna, a counterterrorism unit member he hadn't spoken to in 5 years, and asked her department to look into it. After reassuring him not to be overly concerned about the contact between Sam and his ex-wife, Anna wrote down the flight number and promised to verify the situation. The scene returns to the plane. To prevent further disturbances, the hijackers warned all passengers via the broadcast not to attempt any resistance, or they would be dealt with ruthlessly. The passengers felt despair, thinking they were caught in a suicide hijacking with no one spared. Only negotiation expert Sam remained remarkably calm. He wrote a note to Stewart indicating a problem with the captain. Upon reading it, Stewart quickly asked Sam what was going on. Sam explained that the plane only needed manual control during takeoff and landing. Once cruising steadily, it could be set to autopilot. Sam suggested that if the captain remained in the cockpit, there was no telling where he might take the plane. Enlightened, Stewart promptly removed the captain from the cockpit and forced a first-class female passenger into economy to make room for the captain. The female passenger, angered, told everyone that Sam had voluntarily switched sides to join the hijackers. The passengers were outraged, denouncing Sam as a traitor. Seeing the captain seated in front of him, Sam launched a multiplayer game available on the plane. It was all within his control. He sent a multiplayer request to the display screen in front of the captain. The captain sneakily glanced at Sam, and after confirming they understood each other, the two established a special communication channel through the game. Sam inquired if the captain had reported the hijacking to the command center. The captain confirmed that he had withdrawn the distress message, and the Dubai command center was still unaware of the plane's predicament. Worse yet, they were about to fly over Iraqi airspace. Due to air traffic control protocols, the Iraqi command center would perform identity checks on any plane passing through their airspace. Failure to respond would lead to military action to shoot down the plane. Pondering the situation, Sam began to brew a plan in his mind. Surely enough, before long, the plane received a call from the Iraqi command center. At first, the hijackers tried to make the co-pilot impersonate the captain in responding. However, during the identity check, the opposing party discovered a gender mismatch. As the hijackers were conflicted over whether to risk letting the captain answer the call, Sam stood up. He reasoned and appealed to the hijackers' emotions, urging them to let the captain answer the phone quickly. Otherwise, the entire plane would be shot down. With the experiences prior, Stewart had gained a certain level of trust in Sam. He ordered the crew to escort the captain back to the cockpit to complete the identity verification, and then forced him to report that everything was normal on board. Under pressure, the captain complied, but before leaving, he secretly adjusted the plane's flight path angle by 3 degrees, as Sam had instructed, making the current trajectory deviate slightly from the original course. Meanwhile, Anna contacted the Dubai command center. They reported receiving a reply from the captain and assured her it was all just a farce and there was no need to worry. Anna promptly replied to Daniel and warned him not to bother her again in the future. At this time, everyone outside the plane was unaware that a real hijacking was unfolding. While the staff at the Dubai command center were relieved that the flight was seemingly safe, an inspector sensed something was off. Worried that the captain had been coerced into lying, he went to the security department and repeatedly reviewed the pre-flight surveillance footage. After careful comparison, the inspector finally noticed that a security officer had broken protocol by taking a phone call, then suddenly looked serious and hastily left her post as if she had encountered something urgent. The inspector checked the company's attendance records and found that this security officer had already taken leave and gone home. To uncover the truth, the inspector rushed to the security officer's house. But when he arrived, he found only 2 men cleaning the house, who claimed to be janitors and said the lady of the house was in the bedroom. When the inspector went upstairs, he was shocked to find the security officer had been shot in the head and was lying in a pool of blood, with her husband next to her. As the inspector realized what had happened and thought of escaping, the killer already had the gun pointed at him. The inspector, who was about to figure out the truth, was silenced. Just as all hope seemed to be fading, the staff at the London command center noticed the plane deviating from its flight path. Although the difference was slight, it was a very important signal. After the events of 9/11, no deviation in flight paths was allowed. The staff realized that this was a special distress signal. The plane was in trouble. The scene shifts back to the hijacked plane where an elder seated behind Sam suggested that the bullets used by the hijackers were fake. Sam was skeptical and sought confirmation from the man on how he determined this. The elder explained that he had served 30 years in the military and had dealt with many hijacking incidents. From his experience, hijackers rarely use live ammunition and more often employ blanks, which produce a sound and flash similar to real bullets but cause no harm. Hearing this, Hugo, a passenger sitting next to Sam, became visibly excited. If the hijackers were truly using blanks, then the 200 passengers could surely overpower the 5 or 6 hijackers. Sam urged Hugo to remain calm and not to act rashly, as the stakes were incredibly high. If the elder's assessment was wrong and the hijackers had real guns with live ammunition, they would not only be unable to contend with them, but the safety of all passengers could be at risk. However, Hugo, eager for a chance to survive, was unaware that Sam had already sent a distress signal to the command center. Impatient to verify the authenticity of the weapons and ammunition, Hugo decided to mobilize the passengers to search for any casings on the floor. He clearly remembered that shots had been fired in economy class during an earlier resistance. If blanks had been used, there wouldn't be any casings. With this plan in mind, Hugo pretended to be airsick, approached the female hijacker, and requested to use the restroom. She consented, but insisted that the restroom door remain open. With his back to the hijacker, Hugo stealthily pulled out a pen and paper and scribbled a message while leaning over the toilet. Then, feigning vomiting noises to confuse the hijacker, Hugo prepared to return to first class. On his way, he quickly crumpled the note he had written and tossed it towards the economy class. The passengers exchanged glances, realizing that the paper must contain vital information. The woman closest to it extended her leg to trap the paper and then slowly moved it toward herself. Picking up the note, she read the message, which instructed them to find any casings on the floor and turn on the reading light if not. Not wanting to waste any time, the woman got down and started searching the floor, with the other passengers nervously watching. As the woman was about to finish her search, a patrolling hijacker noticed her unusual behavior and came over to inspect. Thinking quickly, she lied that she was looking for her lost glasses, narrowly avoiding suspicion. After returning to her seat, the woman promptly turned on her reading light. Hugo saw this and felt a surge of excitement. It seemed that the hijackers were not using live rounds after all. It was time to consider fighting back. After all, they outnumbered the hijackers. Sam, however, preferred to wait for the rescue. He believed the absence of findings didn't mean they weren't there. What if casings had fallen into some unnoticed corner? Just then, the plane received another call, requesting the command center to explain the deviation from the flight path. Stewart quickly pulled the captain back into the cockpit. The captain picked up the intercom and explained that the plane had been affected by wind, causing a 3-degree course deviation. Following the command center's instructions, the captain then turned the dials to restore the course. Seeing the adjustment made, Stewart finally breathed a sigh of relief. However, not long after, one of his men hurriedly reported that a diabetic passenger needed an insulin injection, and his son was asking to leave his seat to retrieve the medication from their luggage. Stewart flatly refused and reiterated his orders that all passengers must remain seated. On the other side, Sam saw the captain return to his seat and wanted to continue communicating through the online game to ask about his condition. Unexpectedly, while the captain was typing, Stewart saw him and in a fury struck the captain's head. Sam stood up to intervene, but Stewart turned on him, intending to deal with him too. Before Stewart could act, Sam grabbed his wrist. Another hijacker threatened Sam that if he didn't let go, they would shoot a passenger. Reluctantly, Sam returned to his seat. To punish him, Stewart ordered Sam to smile while accepting a beating. As Stewart raised the gun butt, Sam closed his eyes, trembling. But instead of hitting him, Stewart struck Sam's seat. Despite the loud noise, Sam was unharmed. Stewart was just trying to intimidate him. As the hijackers walked away, Hugo approached the shaken Sam and said that Stewart's actions had just proven something, that the hijackers' guns and ammunition were likely fake. Their behavior seemed more like a bluff. Sam carefully considered Hugo's words, believing that the only way to confirm the truth was to get hold of a hijacker's bullet. While Sam was pondering how to get a bullet, a flight attendant hurried over with important information, saying that shortly after takeoff, a girl had found a bullet, which eventually ended up in the hijacker's hands. Sam asked the retired veteran sitting behind him to draw the differences between live rounds and blanks so the girl could identify them. Simultaneously, the London Command Center, upon detecting a deviation from the flight path, set up a special research group. Alice, the employee who first noticed the anomaly, stated that the captain had 20 years of flight experience, and at present, deviations from the flight path were simply not permissible. The evidence suggested that the plane had been hijacked. Given the gravity of the situation, Alice immediately called the counterterrorism unit. Anna, having previously learned from Daniel about the potential danger to the flight, did not take the call from the command center lightly and rushed to the counterterrorism response center to report the situation. The person in charge called an emergency meeting and sought confirmation from Alice again. Alice reported that just minutes ago, they had called the captain of the flight from Dubai to London to inquire about the reason for the deviation from the path. Although the captain had given a reasonable explanation, the course was not corrected but deviated by another 3 degrees in the opposite direction. The current flight trajectory was becoming more and more peculiar, resembling a Z shape. Alice added that she had previously encountered a case where a pilot used a unique flight route to signal for help to the outside world. The counterterrorism team members gasped in shock. It seemed highly likely that the flight had been hijacked. The airline immediately accessed the passenger list. Officer Daniel, informed of the situation, contacted Anna straight away. After obtaining the passenger list, he used the police database to check if any of the passengers had criminal records. Daniel discovered that among the 200 passengers, only a man had a criminal record, and he was actually the ringleader of the hijackers, known as Stuart. Aside from him, the rest of the passengers were ordinary people. However, it was strange that Daniel found that the identities of 4 people did not exist in the National Data Center, meaning their passports were fake. It was inferred that these individuals were likely the hijackers. The scene switches to the hijacker leader Stuart, who stealthily opens the wireless communication in the cockpit and dials a number, indicating that the plan has begun. The hijacking was originally scheduled to take place 3 hours after takeoff, but had to be initiated earlier due to unforeseen circumstances. Stuart, not receiving a response on the phone, started to become anxious. At that moment, the flight attendant informed Stuart that it was time to distribute lunch to the passengers. Already feeling on edge and worried about further complications, Stuart refused and only allowed the distribution of water. Sam saw an opportunity and passed a comparison chart of bullets drawn by a retired veteran to the flight attendant. Then, while distributing water, he successfully passed a note to the girl. After identifying the note, the girl turned on the reading light that signified blank rounds. The flight attendants confirmed with 2 other girls who had seen bullets, and they all nodded in recognition. Excited by this information, the flight attendant told Sam that there was nothing to fear. With everyone working together, they could turn defeat into victory. Cautious Sam decided to subdue the old hijacker first, the old man who had taken the girl's bullet casing. Once it was confirmed that the old man's firearm was indeed loaded with blanks, they would notify everyone to act together. However, as Sam was preparing to strike, a commotion broke out in the economy class. The son of the passenger with diabetes, risking his life, left his seat to get insulin and a syringe for his father. The hijackers, enraged, stepped forward to stop him. The passenger, desperate to save his father, engaged in a scuffle with the hijacker. Other hijackers rushed over to maintain order. Seeing this, several passengers joined the counterattack and the situation turned chaotic. Amidst the confusion, Sam approached the old hijacker and smashed a meal tray into his face. The old man was caught off guard, and his gun fell to the floor. Sam had underestimated his opponent. The old man shattered a glass jug and used the shards as a weapon, pinning Sam to the ground. Sam managed to grab a fire extinguisher and sprayed it at him. Once the old man recovered, he picked up the gun from the ground. Sam informed him that the passengers all knew that the gun was loaded with blanks, leaving the old man stunned. Meanwhile, Stuart swiftly reloaded his bullets, his presence commanding and beard flexing as he strode towards Sam's direction. Suddenly, a crisp gunshot pierced the air, silencing the once chaotic cabin in an instant. It turns out, in an attempt to quell the uprising, Stuart had resorted to using live rounds, killing a passenger to make an example. This proves that Sam and the others' assumptions weren't correct. Most of the hijackers were indeed using blanks, but as a precaution, they also carried some real bullets. As the situation began to spiral out of control, Stuart had no choice but to forcefully order the flight attendants to broadcast a message. If everyone didn't return to their seats within 10 seconds, he would kill another passenger. After witnessing the recent events, everyone was terrified and quickly returned to their seats. Suddenly, a mother burst into tears, unable to find her child amidst the chaos. Fortunately, the flight attendant found the girl and swiftly returned her to her mother's arms. As the countdown ended, calm was restored. Hearing that a passenger had died at Stuart's hands, Sam surrendered, kneeling down without resistance. Beyond the tense standoff in the cabin, the Counter-Terrorism Response Center in London was also on edge. No one dared to take the situation lightly, and the foreign minister personally arrived to oversee the operations. With only about 4 hours left before landing in London, everyone was in the dark about the hijackers' motives. The plane was completely out of communication, and to make matters worse, it would pass over several countries before reaching London. If those countries failed to receive a response from the aircraft, they might assume it was a terrorist attack and be authorized to shoot it down unconditionally. On board, a young hijacker, feeling the situation slipping out of control, complained to Stewart. Killing a passenger was never part of their plan, and this development was causing Stewart a severe headache. One wrong move led to another, and apart from using force, he saw no other option. Suddenly, he noticed the young hijacker's white shirt soaked with blood. Quickly, he ordered a flight attendant to treat the wound. The attendant hurriedly began to bandage the injured hijacker in the galley. Tied up Sam, seeing the situation, devised another plan in his mind. He told the hijacker that the wound was severe, possibly an internal injury, and that they needed to stop the bleeding quickly to avoid life-threatening consequences. But the efforts of the flight attendant alone were clearly not enough, as blood continued to flow from the wound. Sam suggested that a strong man was needed to help. The young hijacker, fearing for his life, finally lost his composure and asked the old hijacker to find out if there was a doctor or nurse on board. A doctor in a red shirt was about to stand, but his wife stopped him. This was an excellent opportunity. She had no desire to see these malicious villains continue their tyranny in the world. After a few agonizing minutes, driven by fear and Sam's alarming words, the young hijacker agreed to release Sam to help apply pressure to the wound to stop the bleeding. Elsewhere, the son, who had just risen to get insulin for his father, was discreetly slipping a blood-stained knife into a trash bag. Clearly, he was the one who had attacked the young hijacker. Despite Sam exerting all his strength to press down on the wound, it was to little avail. The young hijacker weakened, slumped to the floor, and told Sam that he had seen through his intentions. Sam's willingness to help was just an attempt to gain his favor. The hijacker told Sam that all his efforts were in vain and would not change their situation. Sam replied that he sought nothing but to return safely home to reunite with his loved ones. Although it seemed like a simple statement, it carried a strong psychological suggestion. A flicker of concern crossed the young hijacker's face, and Sam knew his goal had been achieved. And it was this very sentence that became the key to turning the situation around. However, more trouble was on the horizon. At that moment, the plane was approaching the airspace above Romania's capital. As per protocol, the local command center transmitted a call to the aircraft, requesting identity verification. Stewart, already at his wit's end, smashed the communication equipment in a fit of rage. The Romanian command center, not receiving any response, then made contact with the foreign minister in London. However, everyone was in the dark about the situation on the plane. Soon after, the Romanian government dispatched 2 military fighter jets to flank the hijacked plane, one on each side. The hijackers, realizing the sudden development, brandished their guns and ordered all passengers to close the window shades. Stewart headed to the cockpit, determined to remain unyielding and to persevere until they reached London, firmly believing that no country would dare to shoot down a plane from Britain. At that moment, the experienced captain sensed that something was amiss. He took out a map and made some calculations. Based on the flight time, he estimated that they were now over Romanian airspace. He called Stewart over and informed him that if Romania did not receive a response, they would shoot down the plane without hesitation. Ever since the 9/11's events, all countries had heightened their vigilance. Any plane that ignored warnings would be treated as a terrorist threat, and any country could shoot it down unconditionally. Stewart panicked upon hearing this. He had no choice but to ask the captain to return to the cockpit. However, as the captain picked up the intercom to respond, he realized that the communication equipment had been damaged. Stewart couldn't help but regret his earlier impulsive act. They were now in deep trouble. Passengers in the cabin also spotted the fighter jets outside the windows. Unlike Stewart, the passengers were desperate to be seen by the jets, seeing it as a rare opportunity for rescue. One brave flight attendant took it upon herself to risk her safety. She moved to a window seat at the front, and during a lull in the hijacker's patrol, opened the shade and pressed her face against the window. Even though the flight attendant was quickly discovered by the hijackers, she had succeeded in catching the fighter jet's attention. The terrified expression of the flight attendant and the guns in the hands of the hijackers unequivocally indicated that the plane had been hijacked. The 2 pilots in the fighter jets were on high alert, ready to down the plane if necessary. However, before executing the order, the captains sought confirmation from the command center in London. The foreign minister pleaded with Romanian officials to revoke the combat order. In such a situation, no country would be willing to risk allowing a hijacked plane to pass through its airspace. Unless London could prove that Romania was not the target of the hijackers, the order would not be withdrawn. The foreign minister found herself in a difficult position, as they also did not know the true purpose of the hijackers. While British officials were negotiating with the Romanian government, Sam was making substantial progress in his own negotiations. Seeing that the young hijacker was becoming increasingly weak, Sam once again used the hijacker's family as a bargaining chip, encouraging him to make a potentially final phone call to them. The young hijacker signaled to Sam that his phone was in his pocket. Sam felt that his goal was finally within reach. After confirming that the phone was connected to the wireless signal, he immediately dialed his ex-wife's voicemail. However, to avoid arousing the hijacker's suspicion, he pretended to be calling the hijacker's mother. Moreover, he deliberately leaked the mother's phone number, feigning verification, but in reality, he was passing this critical information to his ex-wife. Then, Sam handed the phone to the hijacker, who, oblivious to the ruse, started leaving a message for his mother. Sam was a mix of emotions. The scene shifts to Sam's ex-wife, who, upon receiving the voicemail, immediately contacts her officer boyfriend, Daniel, who is now at the emergency center, working to confirm the identity of the hijackers. Using the phone number provided by Sam, he pieces together the information and finally identifies the hijackers. It turns out they are all British citizens and members of a large criminal organization operating within the UK. In other words, their target is the UK, and the plane's intended landing site is London, making it the final destination for the gang of hijackers. Armed with this crucial piece of information, the British foreign minister quickly informs the Romanian authorities. Meanwhile, in the skies, 2 fighter jets are on standby, pilots zeroing in on the passenger plane with their fingers poised over the buttons. Suddenly, a new order to stand down is issued, and the fighter jets vanish into the vast sea of clouds. The command center staff keep their eyes glued to the screen, and when they see the radar blips of the fighter jets disappear, everyone breathes a sigh of relief. Back in the cabin, the situation for the young hijacker is deteriorating. Having lost too much blood, he has fallen unconscious. A concerned Sam shouts out in the cabin, asking if there are any medical personnel on board. The doctor in the red shirt, who hesitated before, now turns on his reading light above his head. Despite his wife's objections, he moves to the hijacker's side, as saving lives is his duty. Upon examination, the doctor discovers blood has filled the hijacker's lungs, causing difficulty breathing and leading to unconsciousness. The only solution is to insert a tube into his chest to facilitate breathing. After marking an X on the hijacker's chest, the doctor inserts the tube. The young hijacker is soon out of danger and begins to breathe again, bringing a look of relief to Sam's face as things seem to be moving in the right direction. However, when Sam's ex-wife returns home from work, she finds their son missing. The house offers no response to her calls. Meanwhile, the British Home Secretary, just out of a meeting, receives a confidential envelope. Upon opening it, he is incensed to find the hijacker's demands. He immediately instructs his staff to contact the foreign minister. The scene shifts back to the cabin, where the ringleader Stuart sent Sam back to his seat after leaving the doctor behind. As Sam turned around, he overheard the young hijacker on the ground telling Stuart that he had just called Mum. Sam considered these words and eventually realized that the hijacker did not stress his mom, indicating that he and Stuart were brothers. As Sam was figuring out how to use this information to defuse the situation, he happened to notice the co-pilot's badge, which bore the emblem of another country. Sam quickly returned to his seat, drew 2 horizontal bars, one red, one green, on a piece of paper, and asked the passenger next to him to identify which country it represented. Hugo told Sam it was the flag of Italy, but Sam corrected him, saying that the paper needed to be turned to see it correctly. A female passenger declared with certainty that it was the emblem of the Hungarian flag. The captain, overhearing their discussion, reminded them that they would be over Hungary in 15 minutes. Sam thought deeply, as if he had come up with another plan to save everyone. By this time, the plane had been hijacked for 4 hours. The hijacker's accomplice had sent a secret letter to the Home Secretary, demanding the release of 2 imprisoned felons before the plane landed in London. Otherwise, all passengers on board would be killed. The Home Secretary rushed to the emergency center, and after reviewing the information, everyone learned that the 2 felons, named Edgar and John, were senior executives of a multinational corporation involved in a vast drug trafficking network. They had been sentenced to 35 years in prison a few months earlier and were now held in the royal prison. Everyone understood the real purpose of the hijacking. It was not a terrorist attack, but a carefully planned, premeditated crime. In another part of the plane, Sam prepared to have the co-pilot, who spoke Hungarian, contact the Hungarian control center to inform them of the hijacking, and then find a way to land the plane in Hungary to ensure everyone's safety. Sam approached Stewart, exaggerated the young hijacker's condition, and claimed that without treatment, he would not survive another hour. Stewart was skeptical, remembering that the doctor had just said the injured man's condition was stable. How could it have become so serious so suddenly? Sam claimed that the doctor had lied out of fear and that the true situation was that Stewart's brother had less than an hour to live. Hearing this, Stewart was taken aback, as he had never revealed that the young hijacker was his brother. Sam revealed his deduction, and Stewart was left speechless. To verify his brother's condition, Stewart decided to confront the doctor himself. He resolved that if he found Sam had lied, he would kill a flight attendant. After watching Stewart leave, Sam quickly dialed the phone in the workroom. The doctor picked up and could faintly hear the keywords "less than 1 hour" before footsteps began to approach from outside. Stewart appeared, his face menacing as he interrogated the doctor about how long his brother could hold on. Only then did the doctor understand the meaning of the cryptic message he had just received and hurriedly replied, "Less than an hour." Stewart's expression grew grave. It was clear they needed to land the plane at the nearest airport as soon as possible. At this moment, the plane was flying over Hungary. Ignoring the objections of the other hijackers, Stewart was adamant that they land at a Hungarian airport. Sam caught the captain's eye, then stealthily slipped over to the co-pilot and told her that soon they would need to communicate with the control center in Hungarian and take the opportunity to send a distress signal. This was their only chance, and they had to take it. The co-pilot, feeling the weight of the responsibility, immediately went to the cockpit. The captain was still explaining to Stewart that he didn't speak Hungarian and that the local control center only knew a little English. To persuade them to allow the landing, they would need the co-pilot to communicate, who was fluent in Hungarian. To prevent the co-pilot from tampering with the situation, Stewart and the female hijacker closely monitored her every move. Soon, the co-pilot made contact with the Hungarian control center. She first reported in English that all was normal on the flight, but that someone was injured and in urgent need of medical services. Finally, she added in Hungarian that the plane was being hijacked. The hijackers behind her sensed something was off and warned the co-pilot with their guns not to play any tricks. With no choice, the co-pilot informed the control center in English that the plane would reach the airport in 19 minutes and hoped they would be allowed to land. Upon receiving this information, the Hungarian Airport Control Center immediately mobilized the armed forces. After making arrangements, the person in charge at the control center approved the co-pilot's request to land. She also informed the co-pilot in Hungarian that the armed forces were ready. Hearing this, the co-pilot began to manipulate the controls to lower the plane's altitude. At this point, the old hijacker in the floral shirt noticed the plane was descending and rushed into the cockpit to confront Stewart, questioning why he would do this, not realizing that it could jeopardize their entire plan. Stewart, intent on saving his brother, would not listen to the old man's objections and persisted in having the plane make an emergency landing in Hungary. The old hijacker, as if struck by lightning, was out of sorts and shakily went to the workroom, brandishing a gun and forcing the doctor to tell Stewart that his brother was no longer in danger and that the plane did not need to make an emergency landing. Sam, worried that the old man would ruin his plans, stepped forward to dissuade him. He once again played on emotions, stating that if they didn't act promptly, his companion would die. The man suddenly looked grave and fearful. He told Sam that if they didn't follow the original plan, both they and their families would be killed by the mastermind behind the criminal organization. Sam's family would also not escape this fate. Shocked and confused, Sam wondered why his own family was involved. The man explained that when Sam had proactively approached the hijackers with goodwill, they had taken photos of his passport information and sent it to the organization behind the scenes. Seeing Sam's skeptical expression, the old man gestured to the young hijacker lying on the ground, who nodded in agreement. The old man continued, saying that the young hijacker's father had also served the organization and had been killed by them for disobedience. Sam was appalled by the ruthlessness of the organization pulling the strings. Now he faced a difficult choice: either save his own family or save the passengers on the plane. At the Hungarian airport, all armed personnel were loaded with live ammunition, fully equipped and ready for action. They listened to the loud, roaring sound overhead, everyone focused and holding their breath, prepared to apprehend the hijackers and rescue all passengers. Inside the aircraft cabin, the flight attendant reminded passengers to fasten their seatbelts as the plane was about to land. Sam glanced at the ground below and noticed the young hijacker's lips faintly moving, seemingly wanting to say something. Upon careful listening, Sam understood that the hijacker was expressing a plea not to land the plane. After some thought, Sam made his decision. As the plane was about to land, he quickly approached Stewart, insisting that the plane must not land. Stewart, furious, cursed and demanded to know what Sam was up to. Sam explained that this was the wish of Stewart's brother. Of course, Stewart didn't believe him, but when everyone returned to the workroom, they found the young hijacker with no breath left, still clutching the tube that helped him breathe. Stewart knelt in agony. His brother had chosen to sacrifice himself to avoid burdening him and their family and to stop Stewart's hesitation. The young man had decided to end his life, so there was no longer any need for the plane to land. Sam picked up the phone and urgently notified the co-pilot to head to London. The ground-armed personnel could only watch as the plane ascended and finally disappeared into the sky, their faces filled with confusion, unsure of what had just happened to the plane. The camera returns to the ground, where Sam's son, unable to accept his mother's new boyfriend Daniel, watches his mother and Daniel's affectionate behavior, and in a fit of anger, chooses to run away from home. He arrives alone at his father Sam's house, waiting for Sam to come home. Meanwhile, police officer Daniel, following the thread, uses the phone number to locate Stewart's mother's residence. After Daniel's persuasion, Stewart's mother finally reveals the truth. The two brothers, along with their father, were involved in a criminal organization. Their father was murdered for not following the organization's orders, and now the two brothers were forced to hijack a plane, with the threat of being silenced if they failed to complete the mission. For her son's safety, Stewart's mother refuses to disclose any information. Daniel believes that nothing can shake a mother's determination to protect her children. Then, the old lady asks to go to the bathroom to calm down. Daniel doesn't stop her, waiting in the living room, hoping the old lady can trust the police. But after a long time, when Daniel doesn't see her come out, he senses something is wrong. He forcibly breaks the bathroom door lock only to find the old lady has already slipped out the back door. Daniel quickly follows, but it's too late. The old lady has already crossed the railing and walked into the middle of the busy road, seeking death to protect her son. At this moment, the command center in London was chilled to the bone by a piece of heavy news. The police had been alerted to the discovery of the body of the airport security officer who had been mentioned earlier. Her entire family had been brutally murdered by a ruthless criminal. Their bodies were found in the bathroom. Furthermore, the inspector who had intended to investigate the situation was also found dead in the security officer's home. The staff at the emergency center, having reviewed the surveillance footage, understood why the security officer had been killed. Previously, she had been coerced by the hijackers into keeping silent about their bringing guns onto the plane. To cover their tracks, the criminal organization behind the hijacking had her assassinated. The foreign minister and the home secretary were finally made aware of the desperado's ruthlessness. They worried that even if they complied with the hijackers' demands and released the two felon convicts, there were no guarantees that the hijackers would keep their promises and ensure the safety of the passengers. At that moment, two assassins, who had disguised themselves as cleaners and had just eliminated the security officer's family, stealthily entered Sam's home. Sam's son was upstairs at the time and, hearing the noise, looked down from the second floor. But when he caught sight of a gun, he immediately realized the intruders meant harm. The clever boy tiptoed back to his room and quietly hid under the bed. Soon, the killers, having completed their search downstairs, came upstairs with guns. According to their instructions, they had to take control of Sam's family to force Sam's compliance. The boy wanted to call the police, but realized he had left his mobile phone downstairs. Fortunately, he found an old plug-and-play telephone under the bed and prepared to call the police surreptitiously while the hijackers were distracted. With only an hour left until the plane was due to land, the Home Secretary, under pressure, announced the release of the two felon convicts. However, this was merely a stalling tactic. The British government had no intention of letting the criminals go free. As soon as the plane landed safely, they would rapidly deploy police forces to recapture them. The foreign minister urgently called the ports and airports, setting up an extensive dragnet to prevent the criminals from escaping. Upon receiving the instructions, the prison not only released convicts Edgar and John, but also provided them with a car and a burner phone. The two convicts arrogantly got into the car and brazenly warned the police not to follow or intercept them, or they would kill a passenger on the plane. Of course, the police were not going to let them off so easily. They had already installed trackers on the criminal's car and phone. Faced with a crisis, Daniel was once again put in charge of the tracking operation. All the staff in the emergency center were glued to the surveillance screens, closely monitoring the criminal's every move. Then came a report from Daniel. He had discovered that the route the convicts had chosen led directly to a small airport in southern England. He suspected that they intended to board a private plane and flee the country. The emergency center notified air traffic control to keep a close watch. Meanwhile, the criminals, realizing they were being followed, stopped their car in the middle of the road. Edgar, with a defiant look on his face, walked up to Daniel's car and placed the burner phone they had just received from the organization on the hood, then gestured for Daniel to pick up the call. Daniel, puzzled by the convict's intentions, answered the phone. He heard Edgar's arrogant voice on the other end, telling him that the police had been warned not to follow them, but they had ignored the warning. Now, it was time to face the consequences. Daniel was confused, not understanding what kind of punishment Edgar was referring to. At this moment aboard the flight, the hijacker's leader, Stuart, received a text message. The content instructed him to immediately dispose of one of the passengers and send a photo of the body back to the organization. Stuart couldn't help but glance at the flight attendant next to him. Sam sensed something was wrong and got up to check. He discovered Stuart preparing to strangle the flight attendant. Sam intervened vehemently. Stuart argued that he had no choice. He was under strict orders to carry out the instructions unconditionally. Sam then had a thought. During the first outbreak of violence, one of the passengers was shot dead by Stuart. The body was still lying in the restroom. Instantly enlightened, Stuart released the flight attendant and then ordered Sam to go to the restroom to help take pictures of the body. Before long, the photo of the deceased passenger was sent to Edgar's phone. He forwarded the picture to Daniel with the message telling him, "This is what happens to those who don't obey." Daniel understood Edgar's warning. He pulled over to the side of the road and sent the picture of the slain passenger to the emergency center. Everyone there shuddered. It appeared they had underestimated the terrifying extent of the two criminals. The scene switches back to the plane, where Sam returned to his seat, still shaken by the recent events. He told Hugo that Stuart's criminal organization had already begun to take action. Since such orders had been issued, it was hard to guarantee there wouldn't be a second or third, potentially leading to more innocent passengers losing their lives. Sam felt that the hijackers' power was now significantly weakened and their cohesion reduced. They could take this opportunity to stage another rebellion. But how could they convey this idea to the other passengers on the plane? Sam had an idea. He first had Hugo take a pair of scissors from his pocket, which he had managed to get from the first aid kit. Then, he asked Hugo to cut the plastic band around his wrist. Because the band was so sturdy, Hugo's attempt to cut it made quite a commotion. Stuart came over at the noise, glanced at Sam's wristband, which appeared intact, and then at Hugo, who seemed normal. After Stuart left, Sam pulled his hand out of the band. It turned out Sam had managed to cut the band before Stuart arrived. It was all a diversion. As Sam pondered how to notify all the passengers to unite in resistance, he spotted an advertising slogan on a female passenger's milk carton that read, "Get ready to shake things up." Sam decisively took the milk carton and circled the slogan with a pen to emphasize it. Then, he started passing it along to everyone. After being passed from hand to hand, the milk carton quickly went from first class to economy class. Everyone was filled with excitement. Now, with only 4 hijackers left, if the 200 passengers worked together, they could surely overpower them. Upon seeing the coded message, the passengers could barely contain their excitement and began to fashion weapons for resistance. Clothes hangers, hairpins, wires, and other readily available items could all become tools for victory. Unlike the passengers who were filled with rising emotions, the emergency center on the ground was suddenly faced with a dilemma after learning that one passenger had already fallen victim. The question was whether to continue tracking the two criminals. If they persisted in their pursuit, more passengers might be harmed. But if they let the two criminals go, it would be difficult to bring them to justice once they fled overseas. The Home Secretary was not willing to let these two criminals get away and decided to buy time. He deliberately arranged a traffic accident on the route of the criminals' escape. Edgar, driving up to the scene, immediately saw through the ruse as a police tactic to stall for time. In a fit of rage, he called Daniel and berated him without allowing for an explanation. Daniel tried hard to explain that it was just an accidental incident and not a police trick, but Edgar wouldn't listen. He warned Daniel that the police's failure to keep their word had once again crossed his line, and soon they would pay the price for their actions. After hanging up, Edgar drove the car onto a side road surrounded by dense trees, where the car's movements could hardly be tracked on the map, and even drones would struggle to capture real-time footage. The emergency center staff closely watched the screen, fearful of letting the criminals escape. Strangely, after a while, the car's location came to a standstill. Just as everyone was wondering what had happened, the criminal's car started again, heading towards a private airport. Soon, Daniel received another call from Edgar, who arrogantly informed him that he would soon receive another photo on his phone. As long as the police refused to cooperate, more passengers on the plane would die. After the call, Daniel immediately reported the situation to the emergency center. The Home Secretary disagreed with withdrawing the order and vowed to apprehend the two criminals. His statement, however, caused dissatisfaction from the foreign minister, who believed that they couldn't just watch the citizens die at gunpoint. The Home Secretary was left speechless by the rebuttal. On the plane, Stewart received another text message from Edgar. The message demanded that he kill another passenger within 5 minutes and then send a photo. Sam noticed the change in Stewart's expression. Seeing Stewart checking the number of bullets, Sam became even more convinced that a second round of killing was about to begin. Fortunately, the message on the milk carton had already informed most of the passengers. Just as it was about to be passed to the last row, one of the hijackers noticed something was off. He snatched the milk carton and saw the circled slogan. Enraged that there was plotting under his watch, he handed the milk carton to Stewart. Stewart suddenly remembered seeing Hugo with a pen in his mouth, who must have been the one circling the slogan on the carton. Furious, Stewart stormed over to Hugo and demanded that he read out Edgar's command aloud. As Hugo stuttered in fear, Sam stepped forward, claiming it was all his idea, and if someone had to be killed, it should be him. Stewart glared with fury, ready to pull the trigger when the flight attendant ran over, pleading for Sam's life, reminding that Sam had once saved Stewart's brother. At that moment, Stewart was on the brink of collapse, roaring who he should kill next. All passengers looked at each other, too afraid to make a sound. The emergency center on the ground received a message from the front lines saying all armed personnel were in position and ready to act. As soon as the car carrying the two fugitives appeared, they could start the capture operation. The foreign minister, worried about the safety of the passengers, pleaded with the Home Secretary to call off the arrest order. However, the latter responded that the operation had already begun and could not be canceled. As the criminal's car entered the airport, all the armed personnel rushed forward and effortlessly arrested the two individuals in the car. The Home Secretary had a smug look on his face, but the next second, he was informed that the two individuals in the car were not the escaped criminals. They had fallen for a diversionary tactic. It turns out Edgar and John had quietly stopped the car halfway through the woods and switched places with two decoys. After the successful switch, Edgar took out his mobile phone, issued the command to commence the operation, and left with a flourish. On the airplane, Stewart continued to search for his next victim with a gun in hand. The passengers didn't dare to make any sound. Suddenly, Stewart grabbed a passenger nearby, preparing to execute her. Sam realized that if he didn't resist now, it would be too late. He decisively tackled Stewart from behind, and the two wrestled their muscles together. The other passengers were also restless, ready to act. One passenger took advantage of the old hijacker being distracted, snatched up a plastic bag, and pulled it over his head from behind. The situation gradually began to turn around. Just as the captain was preparing to enter the cockpit, something unexpected happened. A middle-aged woman in a white blouse stood up from her seat and headed straight for the restroom. Then, she took out a handgun from her bag, loaded it, and walked forward with a fierce demeanor. Everyone thought she was going to confront the hijackers, but to their shock, she fired and killed the captain, then locked herself in the cockpit. Everyone watched, dumbfounded, wondering about the woman's background and what she intended to do. Turning to Sam's son, he took advantage of the intruders going downstairs and successfully reached the storage room. After plugging in the telephone line, he immediately notified the police. The intruders turned on the TV, and the news was broadcasting the perilous situation of the flight. The incident had been blown out of proportion by those who relished in such drama, stirring up a storm throughout the city. It was now well known to everyone, and this was precisely one of the criminal organization's goals. The journalists who hyped the incident were also their people. As long as the hijacking remained in the spotlight, the airline's stock price would be significantly affected. The criminal organization behind the hijackers could reap massive profits by short-selling the stock. On the plane, everyone was still reeling from the recent events. Sam asked Stewart who the woman in white was. Stewart looked confused because he didn't recognize her either and had no idea what the woman intended to do. Seeing that his situation was hopeless, Stewart surrendered his weapons to Sam. The other hijackers were quickly subdued by the passengers. Then, the passenger who had taken down the old hijacker grabbed the gun from his hand, came up to Stewart with anger, and without hesitation he pulled the trigger, intent on taking down the vicious hijacker leader himself. However, when the bullet fired, he realized that the rounds in the old hijacker's gun were not real. They were just blanks meant to intimidate. Sam explained that not all the hijacker's bullets were real. Most were blanks without lethal power. But the most pressing issue was to determine the identity of the woman and her intentions. After confirming that the woman was not associated with Stewart, Sam picked up the phone to try and communicate with her in the cockpit. However, she refused to engage and had turned off the plane's autopilot, setting the altitude to 1 kilometer and the destination to central London. It was clear her goal was to crash the plane in the heart of London. Meanwhile, the command center on the ground noticed the plane veering off course towards central London. Everyone was horrified. An analyst deduced the real purpose behind the hijacking. In addition to releasing the 2 criminals, the crime organization aimed to tank the airline's stock price and profit from it. As seen from the plummeting stock price since that morning, it appeared that the criminals' objective had been achieved. In order to avoid a larger scale of casualties, the Home Secretary dispatched 2 military jets to closely follow the hijacked plane. If anything unusual was detected, they were prepared to shoot it down immediately. They reasoned that if the plane were to crash into the center of London, the consequences would be unimaginable. Rather than watch the plane fly towards the city center, they preferred to shoot it down while it was still over the sea. The foreign minister obviously disagreed with this decision, believing that until the last moment, there was always a chance for a turnaround. Back on the plane, Sam was still trying to establish contact with the woman in the cockpit. In search of a breakthrough in the conversation, he had a flight attendant help him find the woman's carry-on bag. From a shopping receipt for toys found in the bag, Sam deduced that the woman was a mother. Therefore, her child was her vulnerability and the key to breaking the standoff. With this realization, Sam's hopes were lifted. He attempted to call the cockpit again, but the impatient woman ripped out the phone line, not giving Sam a chance. Meanwhile, she kept glancing at her phone's message screen as if waiting for a particular instruction. While the foreign minister was still in a heated argument with the Home Secretary, Alice received a call from Sam. He and the passengers and hijackers on the plane had all noticed the military jets outside the windows and were keen to understand the government's intentions for dispatching 2 fighter jets. Before Sam could finish his words, Alice urgently requested to speak with the captain. At first, Sam was reluctant to reveal that the captain had been shot and lied, claiming the captain was injured. Alice instantly became anxious. If the captain was injured, who was controlling the plane and altering its course? After hesitating, Sam finally revealed the truth. Upon learning that the cockpit was occupied by an unidentified person, the Home Secretary's resolve to shoot down the plane only strengthened. He called the Prime Minister to request final approval. Seeing this, the Foreign Minister snatched the phone away, declaring that he could not accept such an approach. The 200 passengers on board were British citizens, each with the right to live. If the plane did not alter its course and continued toward the center of London, the foreign minister began emergency evacuations to prevent mass casualties. He stressed that he would take full responsibility for the operation. His impassioned plea finally persuaded the prime minister. The fighter jets, which had been targeting the hijacked plane, received new orders and quickly withdrew, temporarily averting the crisis. Alice continued to call Sam, hoping he could do everything in his power to safely land the plane. Just then, the man who almost missed the flight due to being late as shown at the beginning hurried over. He introduced himself as a trader from the Securities Exchange Center. The crime syndicate behind the hijacking had previously taken his family hostage and threatened him to bring a batch of guns onto the plane and to short the airline's stock. Under duress, the man complied with their demands. Now, he suspected that the woman was in a similar situation, being coerced by the crime organization to follow their orders. In addition, the man continued to explain that everything would end once the plane reached London airspace, and the crime organization made enough money. However, from the current situation, there seemed to be no signs of improvement, and it appeared that the crime organization's greed was not yet satisfied. His suspicions were correct. At a scrapyard in the English countryside, the two escaped convicts were closely monitoring the plummeting stock price of the airline on their phone screens. Edgar was ecstatic. With each passing minute, they could earn an additional $13 million. John urged Edgar to send a message to the woman on the plane to carry out the mission and land the plane at the airport so they could make their getaway. But at this moment, Edgar was blinded by the prospect of money. He had forgotten the original plan, thinking that if he allowed the plane to crash in the heart of London, his wealth would be immeasurable. John felt that Edgar had lost his sanity in the pursuit of money. Seeing his chance while Edgar was unguarded, John made up his decision to shoot him. After Edgar was dead, the woman on the plane would no longer have a source of instructions. She kept sending messages to Edgar's phone asking what to do next, but there was no reply at all. By now, the woman's mental state was also crumbling, and she was ready to let the plane crash into the heart of London. The passengers on the plane seemed to sense their lives drawing to an end. The flight attendants began distributing the hijackers' confiscated phones to the passengers, who started to convey their final thoughts and feelings to their loved ones. Several robust passengers were not willing to sit idly by in the face of danger. They charged towards the cockpit door, attempting to force it open. The flight attendants pleaded with them to abandon this plan, explaining that the cockpit door was made of aluminum alloy, exceptionally sturdy and impervious to such blunt force. Sam came up with an idea. Since they couldn't communicate by voice, they could write down what they wanted to say on paper and display it in front of the camera for the woman inside. Sam hit a soft spot, appealing to the woman's sense of family. He suggested that she must have loved ones like everyone else, perhaps a daughter who wouldn't want her mother to risk the lives of 200 passengers to save her own. The thought of her daughter stirred something in the woman. She reconnected the phone line and reached out to Sam. This gave Sam an opportunity to make his case. After a heartfelt appeal, he finally persuaded the woman. He learned about the task given to her by the crime syndicate. Once they got the money, they would send her a message and the plane would land at London Airport. If she received no message, she was to crash the plane into the center of London. Sam continued to urge the woman not to act rashly, emphasizing that saving her own life was the only way to have a chance to save her child. Finally, the woman agreed to let Sam enter the cockpit alone to help her land the plane. As Sam was about to enter the cockpit, the other passengers who had tried to break down the door also wanted to join him. Concerned that their presence might agitate the already tense situation, Sam threatened them with a gun and barred them from entering. Once in the cockpit, Sam saw that the plane was only a few hundred meters from the ground. The emergency center had already evacuated most of the citizens, preparing for the worst. Suddenly, Alice from the command center received a call from Sam. He reported that he had successfully entered the cockpit, but due to the detour over Hungary, the plane was nearly out of fuel. He urged Alice to arrange contact with a nearby airport to assist with an emergency landing. With this critical information, Alice contacted a small airport within 3 kilometers to guide Sam through the landing. Amidst tears, the woman requested the British government to pardon her crimes and rescue her child. The Home Secretary agreed to all her demands, recognizing that the consequences and losses of a plane crash would have a profound impact on the nation. With Alice and Sam working closely together, the plane activated its air brakes and wheel brakes. Inside the command center, everyone was anxious, praying for the lives of the 200 passengers. With bated breath, they hoped for a miracle. The plane touched down with a massive thud, sparks flying due to the immense friction, accompanied by a slight explosion. Fire engines and ambulances raced to the scene. Fortunately, all passengers were unharmed. The armed forces also captured the hijackers. Heroic Sam stepped out of the cabin door, breathing in the fresh air, the crisis finally averted. A round of applause erupted in the command center, and everyone gave Sam a thumbs up for his courageous actions. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.